by putting yourself in a box, you obviously limit yourself, your worldview, your just life become way more narrow than what it would have been if you made up your own rules and you just lived authentically in each and every moment aligned with what felt right for you. You know, you adapt. I adapted to that lifestyle. You know, with any lifestyle, there are certain like do's and don'ts and things you say, how you behave, and that applies to, you know, any kind of community, religion, race, culture, nationality. There are certain expectations of you, and you put that expectation on yourself eventually. Because it's easier to put yourself in that box and follow the rules of that box than to be out in the wilderness, doing it on your own. But by putting yourself in a box, you obviously limit yourself, your worldview, your just life become way more narrow than what it would have been if you made up your own rules and you just lived authentically.
This is a nihilist public service announcement. It's not a public service announcement telling you what to believe in, but instead what you should not believe in. And many of the things that we need to question, we need to challenge, we need to overturn, they're not presented to us in the guise of a formal religion or of a formal political ideology. But they're nevertheless beliefs or aspects of complex belief systems that insinuate their way into our lives and corrupt us, very much like a religion and like a political ideology. Sometimes, in English, sometimes, we think about the positive meaning of a word as a kind of negative inference from its opposite. What's the meaning of authentic? What's the meaning of authenticity? Well, we all know what it means to be fake. We all know what it means to be insincere or a fraud. And then authenticity very often is something we believe in as the all too vaguely defined opposite of these things. I want to challenge you in this video. I want to invite you to imagine a life in which you don't believe in authenticity in this sense at all. I want to invite you to consider the possibility that the opposite of authenticity is in fact unfamiliarity. When something is traditional, when something is familiar, it feels authentic. We think of it as authentic. When something is unfamiliar, we can't judge it in this way. We may or may not feel ill at ease. When something's really unique, something shockingly new, then questions of authenticity and inauthenticity cannot be applied to it at all. When you're looking at something that's one of a kind, it's neither authentic nor inauthentic because it can't be a knockoff. It can't be an imitation of something else that came before. Now, I'm mostly interested in philosophically profound and politically significant ramifications of this. The shallow aspects of this particular piece of the puzzle are worth thinking about for a moment as well. For many years, I wore army boots. I wore combat boots. I wore steel-toe construction boots of various kinds. And I got attacked often enough by stray dogs, feral dogs, that sort of thing. I was attacked by human beings very rarely in those years. But I'd like to think I was prepared, in part, by having on steel-toe boots, steel-toe combat boots, or construction boots. Many men, including men with PhDs who become professors whom I have known, get locked into the mentality that this is who they really are. That for them to put on a different pair of shoes is inauthentic. It's a betrayal of their true selves, of their very soul. Again, it's seen a little bit differently for different genders and at different ages. But no, man, you've got to be yourself. Wait. Since when was being yourself a pair of boots? No, man, ever since I was a teenager, this is the style of boots I wore. This is the kind of guy I am. I'm a tough guy who's prepared for a fist fight or prepared to fight off stray dogs. And I used to live a somewhat dangerous lifestyle, which I was. I mean, the dogs attacked me often enough. Again, human beings, once in a while, But like, you're going to fasten onto this as a notion of who you truly are. And then you're going to recoil in horror at something unfamiliar. When I first started wearing running shoes, gym shoes, athletic shoes, Adidas, Puma, this kind of thing, I remember being shocked at how lightweight they were. The movement of my feet when I was walking was unfamiliar. I didn't just walk wearing these heavy steel-toe boots, I would ride a bicycle that way. And again, not without reason, because sometimes you get attacked while you were on the bicycle. You go straight from riding the bicycle into some kind of tussle, But anyway, it is what it is, What's so dangerous about the notion of authenticity is that people feel that committing to a code of ethics, right, deprives them of their authenticity, when in fact authenticity itself is a kind of restrictive code that deprives you of being who you really are, but you have become so alienated from who you really are that you regard a pair of boots as your true self. If you met someone who was raised Muslim and then they became an atheist, right? How would you feel if they complained to you that now their new lifestyle in some way, whether it's the food they eat, the company they keep, what they do, that this feels inauthentic? They say to you they've lost their faith in Islam, but they say, this is not who I truly am. You're going to have to say to them, look, I understand you lived a certain way when you were a child, you lived a certain way as a teenager, and now at whatever age this person is, you can lose your age, you can lose your faith at any age, you can have this transformation. I know these things are unfamiliar to you. The fact that they're unfamiliar, the fact that they're new and challenging, right? Precisely that is the process of you discovering who you really are, as opposed to the behaviors and values that were inculcated into you by your parents, right? Who you are is not Islam. If your parents were neo-Nazis, who you are, no matter who you are, no matter, I don't know, maybe you're a terrible person, I guarantee you, whoever you are is not the person your parents wanted you to be. You may be something worse than a neo-Nazi, but if your parents inculcated these values into you and tried to raise you as a neo-Nazi, that ideology is no more who you truly are than a pair of boots. And again, I know some of you have heard this 100 times, you've heard this 1,000 times, but my parents were communists, and they weren't moderate communists. They weren't Noam Chomsky style communists. They were really serious Mao Zedong, Joseph Stalin communists who endorsed killing millions of people, and just for that, their form of communism was just as extreme and serious as neo-Nazism. And it was hard. Like growing up, it's like first a breaking point when you realize communism is not who I really am. But then more broadly, Marxism is not who I really am. And then more broadly still, just kind of the vaguely defined left wing is not who I really am. Now, and sorry, some of you know this, but some of you it's your first time hearing. I became a scholar of Buddhism. It's a little bit different because I wasn't a child. From the very beginning, I knew, this is not who I really am. I knew. It's not like I fell out of an airplane had a concussion and actually believed I was Cambodian, waking up in Cambodia or waking up in Laos, or felt I was Laotian, or felt I was really part of that culture or part of that religion. To give you an example, I was involved with scholarship, study of the history and philosophy of Buddhism and so on. But when I actually sat at a Buddhist wedding, when I sat at a Buddhist funeral, when I was in a Buddhist temple talking to Buddhist monks, I never had the delusion, this is my culture, or even these are my feelings, frankly. I was never really sentimentally a part of the religion that way, which is also interesting. It's interesting to be inside a religion and at the same time utterly alienated from it. But still, there's a challenge to my identity, and there was a breaking point when I had to give up being a scholar of Buddhism, when I had to give up being an author who writes about Buddhism, who researches Buddhism, where that's not my career, that's not who I am anymore, right? And there's a difference here too, because it's not a total rejection, the same way that you reject something your parents inculcated into you, because that was a life I chose. That was an area of study I chose, and form of erudition I acquired. The point isn't, this is not who I am, but this is not all that I am. I'm more than this. I can do far more and many different things. Now, again, I'm not going to go through my whole life story here, but in those years, so much of my energy goes into reading and researching history, reading and researching politics, reading and researching books, but also studying languages, studying and practicing languages. Indescribable, the level of effort. You don't just learn the modern Laotian language, you learn the ancient Pali language, and you study the connections between the ancient language and the modern language. There are like 6 different modern languages involved. It's a lot of work. Okay. I remember I broke down weeping the day I gave my dictionaries away. I had a stack of dictionaries, and I was on the Mekong River. And I didn't weep for long, but, I shed a couple of tears because I knew there was no going back. I was losing these languages. I was losing what the languages meant to me. There was a whole life, a whole idea of who I was going to be in the future, the type of research, But these books, this learning, this lore, and, this history, the politics and so on that goes along with it, right? That's not who I really am any more than a particular pair of boots. Okay? As Herodotus says, it is what is contrary that is best for man, as with the bow and the lyre. So a bowstring, it's when you pull it taut, when you pull it tight, that's when the bow is working. With playing the lyre, with tuning a lyre, right? It's what is contrary. What is familiar for you? What you're comfortable with? Whether that's something traditional, like celebrating Thanksgiving in the same way every year, celebrating Christmas in the same way every year, something traditional going back centuries perhaps, in your culture, in your political context, that kind of familiarity. Or if it's just familiar to you from your own childhood, from your own teenage years even, like maybe not something your parents gave you, but like this style of boots, something you just wore for a particular period of your life. And I've heard this also about body image. I remember hearing a bodybuilder talking about how hard it was for him to shift his mentality just from one body type to the other. I don't know, he went from being 300 pounds to being 250 pounds, and it was a whole crisis of identity because he worked so hard to be this enormous 300-pound guy, and all his feelings and how he feels when he looks in the mirror, and his whole life changes in a strange, subtle way. For some of us, it's body fat that's changing, not muscle, but those challenges, to who I am. Well, what is authentic in this sense? It's evil. It's evil to choose to live your life in this gilded cage of your own making, this ersatz ideology of authenticity. It's evil, and what's interesting is it's not so much bad for other people, it's bad for you. Precisely what is good for you is to negate and reject and challenge the assumptions you're comfortable with. What is good is what's challenging. What is contrary for man, like the bowstring and the lyre. What would actually be good for you would be if you're willing to get out of your comfort zone and say, hey, look, you know what? I never liked Christmas. Christmas, for me, I don't believe in Jesus. And you know what? If we're really being honest, it actually carries with it a lot of bad memories from my childhood. Yeah, I'm sure there are some happy memories, okay? I'm sure there are some. But can we be honest? The tradition that you're carrying on and continuing here, right? Maybe, you have to think about what will be really meaningful for you in your own life, in your relationships with your children, your relationships with your wife, or what have you, and what's going to be meaningful in the next 20 years. And maybe the hardest thing of all is not to be in a situation like I was in, where, one day you're in Cambodia, one day you're in Laos, you're studying the language and history and politics there, and then in a very visible, tangible way, that changes. Now you're living in a different country, studying a different language. Okay, so that's something externally real, right? Everyone can see the difference in your life because it ultimately corresponds to an airplane ticket and a different dictionary, a different intellectual challenge. You know what? Maybe the hardest change of all is where the destination is unknown, where the book hasn't been written yet, right? Where it's up to you to decide what's meaningful for you and for others, in as much as you can influence those around you and the whole world. Where the challenge isn't switching from studying Cambodian to studying Chinese. That's something happened at one time. The challenge is to switch from studying something that already exists to producing something that does not even exist yet. And once you're in that realm, once you've taken the step forward, to living that way and thinking that way, then you get to turn around and look back at this whole concept of authenticity and realize that people, precisely when they think they're rebelling against a code of ethics, as in this case, this woman rejected veganism as something inauthentic, as someone else's idea of right and wrong, to instead pursue her own idea of right and wrong. I hear this all the time from all kinds of different perspectives. In fact, what you're doing is taking a derivative notion. You're taking someone else's idea and embracing it as your own, as a standard of authenticity. In the same way that the Coca-Cola company created an idea of Santa Claus that managed to, insinuate itself into our religious culture, our political culture, into our childhood experiences and our dreams. Nobody at the Coca-Cola company was engaged in a conspiracy at this time. But whether it's Coca-Cola company's invention of Santa Claus, Mickey Mouse, Batman, so on and so forth, there are a lot of these things that for us become the touchstones of authenticity, right? And people really do think, this is who I really am. This is where I'm at home. This is where I'm comfortable. And if you can just take a step back, you can recognize that it's the most inauthentic thing in the world. It's the most derivative thing in the world. And what you have done is confused authenticity with familiarity. And the challenge of being an adult, unlike being a child, is to push yourself out into that zone where everything is utterly unfamiliar. And as challenging as that might seem when you're just talking about going to Cambodia, you're going to Cambodia and it's unfamiliar because you don't speak Cambodian yet. It's all, no. The real challenge is when you're going out into a country that's utterly unknown. It's when you're taking on the creative role and, in a sense, even creating a new language, creating new meanings, making things thinkable for yourself and others that have never been thinkable before.
That's a topic for a video.